Welcome to Cancer Support Community's What's in Your First Aid Kit series. I'm Danelle Johnston, Senior Vice President of Mission Delivery at Cancer Support Community. We are a global nonprofit network of 175 locations, including Cancer Support Community and Gilded Club affiliates, hospitals, and clinic partnerships that deliver more than 50 million in free support and navigation services to patients and families. We administer a toll-free helpline and produce award-winning educational and digital resources that reach more than 1 million people each year. We also conduct cutting-edge research on the emotional, psychological, and financial journey of cancer patients and advocate at all levels of government for policies to help individuals whose lives have been disrupted by cancer. Our belief that community is stronger than cancer is what led us to create the 7-session program for oncology professionals. We recognize that you, the cancer care community, are on the front lines of care. The care you provide impacts cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers from the moment of diagnosis through the end of life. We thank you for your commitment, your passion, and your compassionate expertise. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Emily Gentry. Emily is a Senior Director of Education and Program Development for the Academy of Oncology Nurse and Patient Navigators. She is also the Co-Director of Certification for AONN Plus Foundation for Learning. Prior to joining AONN, she served as the Navigation Director at Sarah Cannon Cancer Institute at Medical City Healthcare in Dallas, Fort Worth, which provides world-class cancer care and access to leading-edge therapies for patients across North Texas. She has been engaged in supporting cancer patients and their families for more than 30 years. Across her oncology career, she has worked as an oncology and hematology nurse at the bedside, a chemo infusion nurse, a research study nurse, navigator, patient education leader, community outreach liaison, and oncology program director, leading care teams that support cancer patients and family members. A graduate of Baylor University School of Nursing, she joined HCA in 2014 after a 28-year career with Baylor Healthcare System. While at Baylor, she collaborated with colleagues to develop and grow the organization's efforts with cancer survivorship and patient navigation, working first with Baylor Medical Center Dallas and then Baylor Medical Center Plano. She was recognized as Nurse of the Year in 2011 with Baylor Medical Center Plano. She developed numerous community-facing programs while at Baylor with HCA to support cancer patients and their families. Emily has worked over the last several years to elevate the relevance and define the role of oncology nurse navigator within the community hospital setting. Gentry's focus on building processes and defining outcomes that will enable nurse navigators to work as part of the integrated care team. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you, Danelle, for such a kind introduction. And I am really looking forward to embarking on our discussion today with all of you. I hope that you will engage in our chat and again, that you will ask your questions. We look forward to discussing our presentation today, but it's always more lively when you engage and you learn from each other. We're all on this journey together. As we look at our topic today, the best surge protector, self-compassion, I really like this comparison today. When we think about a surge protector, we all know that we need one for our computer, but this image also correlates nicely with our topic today and has implications for the importance of self-compassion. So for example, surge protectors prevent voltage spikes. And so entering a computer or spikes that may happen to anything around it. Electrical surges can happen on any wire, and thus you need protection on every wire going into your computer. Some surge protectors may die from a single big surge or from absorbing many small surges over time. and better surge protectors cut off power in a surge rather than absorbing it. So again, it's so important that we are diving into this topic of self-compassion today. So like the characteristics of a surge protector, I hope that you will see that we can build skills in our toolbox for self-care, preventing hopefully unnecessary voltage spikes to ourselves or to anyone around us. I hope that you see the value of taking care of your whole self, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and that we can be proactive to understand what we need to provide self-compassion to care for those now and for ourselves over time. So as I did not have anything to disclose for this presentation, and I just want to walk you through our agenda for today. And so again, we want to start off just speaking to what is self-compassion. We want to speak to what it is not. We want to talk about the 3 critical elements of self-compassion. And then we want to kind of dive into why do caregivers need self-compassion? And then I want to talk a little bit about some exercises and maybe hopefully hear from you on some practices in regards to self-compassion. And then we certainly want to answer any questions and open it up for discussion today. So we're going to jump into our discussion today with this first question, and I hope you'll take a moment to think about it a little bit. Most people don't have any problem with seeing compassion as a thoroughly commendable quality, yet we seem less sure about self-compassion. Let me know if you agree or disagree with this statement. So again, we may seem easily to provide compassion to others, but do we take the time to understand the importance of self-compassion for ourselves? And 100% of you agree with this statement. So I think, again, you're going to be very in line with our discussion today. And it's so great to see everyone chatting in and to see all the different representation from across the country. So again, I hope that you will make any comments that you would like. So when we think about that, again, it's easier for us to see to provide compassion to others, but it can be something that we all really struggle with in providing that compassion to ourselves. It's important to define self-compassion. So let's have the next slide. Thank you. And Dr. Christine Neff, she is really the pioneer for self-compassion from the UT Austin. And so we wanted to take a moment, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to hear from her and her work on defining self-compassion, and then we'll break it down from there.
What is self-compassion?
I think it's usually easier for people to understand what self-compassion is if they think of what it feels like to have compassion for others, which is more familiar. So let's say you've got a good friend who you're very close to, and she tells you something that's gone wrong in her life, or maybe she's made some big mistake, blown it on a work assignment. So if you have compassion for your friend, the first thing is you're tuned into her suffering. I mean, maybe your friend doesn't even say she's upset, but you just notice the way she looks, and you say, oh, what's wrong? Tell me about it. So you've got to notice that she's suffering first, and then in response to that suffering, you have to be kind, caring, supportive, try to comfort your friend, soothe her, let her know that it's okay, let her know that you still care. And then finally, it's important to remember that suffering is part of the human experience. You might say to your friend, oh, it's only human, it happens to all of us, it's an experience that we all share, so your friend doesn't feel isolated in her suffering. So compassion really involves 3 basic components: noticing suffering, being kind and caring in response to that suffering, and remembering that imperfection is part of the human experience, something we all share.
And is this the same for self-compassion then?
Exactly the same. So with self-compassion, the most important step actually is to notice your own suffering. And a lot of people say, well, isn't that blindingly obvious? But in fact, it's not. Especially when your suffering comes from your own self-judgment and self-criticism. Some of our worst pain is when, we look in the mirror and you notice you've gained 10 pounds. Well, that is a real moment of suffering that's worthy and deserving of a compassionate, caring, comforting response. But most of us don't do that. We just keep on beating ourselves up. Or let's say something happens like your child gets sick. Most of us go straight into problem-solving mode. You know, what do I have to do? Who do I have to call? And you forget to say, wow, this is really difficult. This is really stressful. I need some soothing and comforting. Most people forget that they need to give that to themselves. So again, with self-compassion, it's noticing that you're suffering, and it's being kind in the face of that suffering, saying, oh, this is really hard, you know, poor thing, this is stressful, this is difficult, or it's really hard to feel inadequate or ashamed about something, and just being really open-hearted towards yourself. And then finally, it's so important remembering that suffering and imperfection is part of the shared human experience. I mean, where's that contract you signed before you came into this world saying you would be perfect and life would be perfect? And yet most of us, when something goes wrong, either in ourselves or in our lives, we say, hey, this isn't supposed to be happening. But in fact, it is supposed to be happening. It's part of the experience. It's okay. So self-compassion involves remembering when things go wrong, when you make mistakes, that you need to be kind and caring and supportive towards yourself. And the great thing about self-compassion is that you're always there. You're there 24/7 to give you help when you need it most.
Thank you for hearing from Dr. Neff. I hope that, again, that's just setting the groundwork for our discussion today and really framing up the definition of self-compassion. And as we started off with that polling question, and I think we all agreed 100% that, again, it's easy sometimes for us to provide compassion for others, but again, it's very challenging for us to provide self-compassion when we look at ourselves. And so why do we not offer ourselves self-compassion? You may have experiencing offering compassion to others, but practicing on it, that skill on yourself may seem somewhat strange. Some people may see it even as an indication of weakness because of our personality, our upbringing, our culture. Sometimes that desenses us to being compassionate to ourselves. Sometimes it's challenging to open up to your own pain. It can be overwhelming. You may be afraid that you cannot cope. And then again, we may feel undeserving of really focusing on providing ourselves self-compassion. So there's a number of thoughts of why we may not be compassionate to ourselves. I think Dr. Neff does a really great job of just framing this definition up for us. She really talks about that the first key element is the ability to really notice suffering in yourself. And again, being in tune to that. Really being able to be responsive and kind and compassionate to yourselves. And then she brings up that whole element of the human experience. Again, understanding that there is imperfection and that it not only affects us, but it's in relation to all those that we interact with. So again, what does self-compassion look like? And from this slide, you can just see again some reminders. It involves responding in the same way, supportive and understanding as you would a good friend, especially when you're having a difficult time, when we fail, or when we notice something that we don't like about ourselves. It requires us not to ignore our pain, but instead offer comfort and care. It's really challenging for you to really be compassionate to yourself if you cannot be open to the experience or the pain or the suffering that you are experiencing. It necessitates understanding when we're confronted with personal failings. And again, that is in relation to that context of really accepting our humanness. So again, if this is resonating with you, I'd love for you to chat in anything that is standing out to you. So here's our first chat box. Why is it so hard for us to offer ourselves self-compassion? So again, would really like to hear from you. Why is it so hard for us to offer ourselves self-compassion? Or why do we resist? We'll see if we have any thoughts from those of you listening today.
Here we go. I find it easier to spend time addressing the needs of others rather than myself.
Excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely. I think we're very much focused on others. And so it's very challenging to take that time and really reflect on our own needs.
Here's another comment. I know that logically it's important to give myself the same care, but it's a hard habit to break.
I think you've really hit on something there, and that's such a good reminder for all of us today. And I'm in this journey with you as I speak. But again, these are habits, and this has taken some time in the way that we care for ourselves. And so it's going to take time to learn new habits. But the hope is that we are able to bring new. We're going to talk about at the end of our discussion today some new exercises, and with reflection we can work on how we are caring for ourselves. So that's a really great point, that it builds up over time, but then there is time for you to rebuild also.
There's one more comment. Sometimes it feels selfish, or I'm afraid others will think I am.
And that is another excellent point, and that really leads us, you really provided a great segue into our next discussion point. If I could have the next slide, please. Discussing what self-compassion is not. And I really like what you said about it's hard to place focus on our own needs, because one of the things that self-compassion is not, if I could just go ahead and have the next slide. These three key elements came out, and I think they kind of parallel with your last comment. Self-compassion is not self-pity. And so again, when we feel self-pity, we really feel immersed with our own problems. We may feel that we are the only ones suffering. It really, self-pity allows us not to see the related experiences of others, and we can feel an isolation or disconnection. We're not really able to have a balanced perspective. And so again, self-compassion is really the opposite of self-pity. Another issue or characteristics that self-compassion is not is self-indulgence. And so self-compassion doesn't mean that we can get away with everything. Again, we want to be happy and healthy over time. So for example, watching TV and then eating gallons of ice cream all day, that would be considered self-indulgent versus self-compassion. So now I have to be honest, I've certainly had those days where I've had my scoop of ice cream, but again, it's not permission to behave in those characteristics or in those mannerisms that would not be healthy or happy for yourself in the long term. And again, self-compassion is not self-esteem. When we think about self-esteem, we're really looking at our self-worth, our perceived value. Many times it's related certainly in our culture to success and failure. Especially you can see self-esteem fluctuate in relation to self-evaluation. And really self-compassion is the opposite of that, in that, again, all human beings deserve compassion and understanding, and not because of a trait or a success, but again, because of who they are. So again, self-compassion allows for greater self-clarity, and again, dealing with all of our personal failings and not hiding them. So again, thank you for your comments and chatting in on your understanding of self-compassion and why it's challenging. And I hope that just by reflecting on, again, what it is not, kind of helps you build your understanding for what self-compassion is. May I have the next slide? So again, just to kind of circle back with our beginning conversation and just building these out a little bit more, the elements of self-compassion, we really see the element of self-kindness, the element of common humanity, and then mindfulness. And so again, we want to call these out, and over these next few slides, you'll just be able to see some examples of this. So again, self-kindness is really versus that self-judgment. She gave the example of hopping on the scale and perhaps we have gained a couple of pounds, and just immediately the self-critique that we may face. But again, if we were counseling another friend who might be on a weight journey, we probably would be very encouraging them to just, again, just a minor setback. What can we do to move forward? You'd be offering, that support. But again, we're not always treating ourselves in that same way. So again, that self-kindness versus self-judgment. Again, giving yourself the tenderness and care you need when you're going through a tough time. I really like also, she pointed out that, many times if we have a sick child or something that occurs, we really go into that problem solving mode. And that really stood out for me versus maybe stepping back and really being in that moment and really absorbing, that this is tough, and we may need to process or grieve that situation before we move into problem solving. So again, it depends, and you understand how you react when you receive information or you're dealing with challenges or failings or successes. But again, just having that insight into how you respond and then seeing how that kind of correlates with this idea of providing that self-kindness to yourself. Do you mind going back one more slide? I'm just going to see if there was, let's see, there were a couple more things I'll just call out here again. Trying to understand and show patience regarding your own perceived personality flaws, and then being tolerant of our own shortcomings. Again, all sometimes easy to say than do, but again, with work, as we talked about in our beginning of our discussion, we can practice this and learn to care for ourselves in a kind way. Now it'd be great to have the next slide. Thank you. Common humanity. And again, this is the whole idea that, again, we're all going through suffering. We all may experience life together versus that I am the only person suffering. So examples might be perceiving your shortcomings as natural aspects of the human condition, viewing your difficulties as part of life that everyone goes through, and reminding yourself that others also feel inadequate at times when you feel the same. I think as an oncology nurse, I really saw this played out early in my career. There was a mother, she's a physician in our area. She had 3 children. She's actually written some books on her experience, Dr. Wendy Harpham. And in her cancer experience, there was a time where I remember she was sharing that they had gone home for the weekend. She knew that she was taking chemotherapy medications that would cause the loss of her hair. And so as a family, they really got together, they shaved her head, but it became an opportunity for them to really talk about the seriousness of a cancer diagnosis and what this meant as a family for them to go through it. And I'll always remember as a young oncology nurse hearing that story and understanding that it's okay to walk through these tough times together, to be vulnerable, to be transparent. It really made an impact on me and how she dealt with that experience. And I think that this example kind of correlates to this common humanity. Again, life doesn't always go as we expect, but again, if we can acknowledge our feelings or our our emotions in that experience and realizing that they're not just affecting us, but again, we can be transparent with those around us to get through them, and that we're not alone in these experiences. And again, it takes people being open to do that, to be able to understand that we are all walking some of these roads together. So next slide, please. And mindfulness. And again, in this element it's called out in self-compassion. Again, just examples would include aiming to keep our feelings in balance when we experience something upsetting, maintaining perspective when we fail at things that are important to us, and then adopting our emotions with curiosity and openness when we feel sad. And I really liked this graphic. I know I really related to it. Is my mind full? Many times, our mind is full. We don't really take that moment to step back and be quiet or be reflective. And so again, it's this opportunity to take a balanced approach to our negative emotions and a willingness to observe our negative thoughts or emotions in openness with clarity and being receptive to them. Again, we can't ignore them if we want to have compassion for ourselves. I'm seeing some chats coming in here, so.
Yes, we have a good comment. I think this is why it's sometimes difficult to put my own self-care needs first. Everyone has had so many additional self-care needs, and it goes back to what the other Laura said about feeling kind of a sense of selfishness. If everyone else is dealing with it, maybe I should just suck it up. Yeah, it's a great comment.
Yeah, it is a great comment. And I think it is, especially as we move into this next discussion point on caregivers, it would be easier many times for us just to kind of suck it up or push it down. But again, that is not always, as healthy as a reaction as we hope for. But I think it is a common one, again, because we do tend to put others' needs first before our own. So, and this may be another great question for you to chat in as we move into why do caregivers need self-compassion? And so again, caregivers could be those that are professional caregivers, or we also care for others, our family, our aging parents. And so really want to focus on how, as caregivers, it's really important to have self-compassion on ourselves so we can remain in the presence of suffering without being overwhelmed. The really idea here is that we need to be generating compassion for ourselves as caregivers so that we can sustain the opportunity to care for others. And again, I think this is specifically very challenging in the area of oncology, where the challenges are immense, that it is, we are able to continue to build this compassion for ourselves as we are giving compassion to others. Research also finds that people who are compassionate to themselves have a decreased depression, decreased anxiety, and decreased stress. Again, being hard on yourself is really a challenge in the ability to stay in caregiving long-term in a healthy way. Next slide, please. Even Brene Brown, she talks about self-compassion is key because when we're able to be gentle with ourselves in the midst of shame, we're more likely to reach out, connect, and experience empathy. And so again, it's this importance of just, I really appreciate that we are having this series of workshops and that we are having these frank discussions. And I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the importance of compassion fatigue and self-care, but at the really basis of all of this work is, again, this kind of fundamental idea of this providing compassion to ourselves. And so I think it's important that that doesn't get lost in that as we focus on all of these different topics of self-care together. So I know for me, it's been a really important reflection. And I hope that as we turn now into, how can we build our just strategies to build self-care and this awareness of self-compassion for ourselves. But I do hope that it will cause you to think and just have some time to reflect on how you're doing in this space. So we're going to talk a little bit about practicing self-compassion. And again, another great comment coming in here. Perhaps we can reframe the word selfish and the term sacred selfishness, a way of honoring our own need to lean into our own self-care or compassion. That's just beautifully said, Susan. It really is a way of honoring yourself. And I think that many of us feel like it's a privilege as we, especially in oncology, interact with patients and families during such an intimate time of care. And so again, taking that mindset and having it as we think about ourselves in the caregiver role is so important. So we're going to turn now to really looking at practicing self-compassion. And so again, would really love to hear from you, especially if you would like to. We'll talk in a little bit as we talk about some of these. If there are ways that you are encouraging your own growth in self-compassion, we would love to learn from each other. So again, some of these are interventions that you may have seen before. You may be practicing them. It's so important, again, to have that foundation of self-care. And so again, it really can start with your mind. I think you've seen today, as Dr. Neff was describing, self-compassion and just that basis of the idea that it is so easy for us to care for others, but yet we don't think to do that same for ourselves. Again, it's transforming our mindset. And I know one of our colleagues today on this call just pointed out to us again, it can take some time to change your mindset or to transform it, as it's stated here. Speak and think kindly about yourself and being intentional to do that. It's very easy to, I think, for many of us, and I'll speak for myself and my own experience, to be very critiquing immediately versus being kind. And again, speaking it and actually training myself to focus on being kind to myself. Forgiving our mistakes, I think that ties into, we were talking a lot about that human perspective. Again, we all make mistakes, and just being gracious to ourselves. Spending time doing things you truly enjoy and find passion for. Again, those things that give you energy. And again, a very important one. And again, some of the comments earlier were talking about that sometimes we just don't take the time because we are so focused on our care for others. So this is one that we might be intent to do. And I know I'm really challenging myself to, I'm really enjoying gardening and being in the outdoors. And so again, finding those ways that you are feeling built up is so important. We've talked a lot about striving to avoid judgments and assumptions. Finding common ground with others. And again, understanding that you're not alone in your feelings or your failures, that there are support around you. And again, it's taking care of your mind and your body. It's that holistic approach. And then paying attention to where your passion lies, realizing it's not all about you, and then cultivating acceptance. And I think cultivate is a really key word here because again, you know, it's something that takes time to do. So I'm seeing a lot of chats coming in, so we can go to our next slide. I think here's where we'd really like to open it up and hear from you. And I'm hoping, yeah, let's go ahead and pause here if you'd like. Susan, there's a number of great comments coming in here. Let's see.
Yep, I'm seeing them too. I find that meditation and making art is helpful. Also walking and reading fiction.
I love that. So those practices are not only on the mind, but also that creative element. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And then also, what a great balance. Also the physical part with walking and then the reading fiction. And again, just stimulating our mind, but in a new way. So great ideas. So thank you for those.
And here's something else that I imagine will resonate with the group. I know when I get burnt out and don't address my needs that I'm no good to others, because then I'm just running on fumes and less able to stay present. Yeah.
It's an excellent point. And that goes back to the first piece of really understanding self-compassion is just the ability to notice it, to acknowledge it. And so that you do have a need. And so that's excellent insight. That's great for all of us to step back and really understand that we need to be really assessing ourselves and where we are, and really being able to understand when we're running on those fumes. There are some great exercises out there in the literature, and so these were pulled, and you will have the opportunity to have a website here that you can go and dig a little deeper, but there are some examples of exercises, and I know sometimes it seems, you know, I know we just kind of glaze over that these may not either take the time, or they may feel kind of awkward, I know, to actually participate in, but I think that they can be really valuable. And as Dr. Neff was talking about in her initial description of self-compassion, it's really like, how do you treat a friend? And so again, this exercise is really thinking about just in that moment, you know, in your responding to yourself, and perhaps it is in a critical way, just to step back and say, hey, how would I respond to myself if I was talking to a friend? And so again, it's really reframing how we're speaking and how we're thinking to each other. there's another great one here on exploring self-compassion through writing. And so I don't know if any of you are journal writers or, and again, journals can look a lot of ways. That's what I've been learning. I think I used to be intimidated potentially by keeping a journal. My competitive nature, I felt like if I missed a day, I think it's from those days when the diaries came out. And, you know, if I wasn't as self-disciplined, I thought maybe I had blown it. But journaling really can be topical. It can be thematic. It can be a Thanksgiving journal. There's lots of different ways to journal and write to express yourself. And so I'd really encourage you to lean into that. And it's a great opportunity to also have to see your growth, to be able to look back and reflect on where you were and where you're going. And so again, that journal can really be, it also can be an outlet for our feelings in a very healthy way. So writing a letter to yourself could be an excellent exercise. And so again, I would just encourage you that depending on kind of what you're needing, that there are a lot of tools for the toolbox out there and a lot of different exercises that you can maybe practice and take a risk and try something new to encourage yourself in this way. May I have the next slide, please? So this is our next polling question. How many of you practice self-compassion regularly? And again, maybe it's in relation to some of the pieces that we talked about earlier. I'm curious to see the answer to this. I'm not sure that I know. All right. This is probably where I would have leaned as well. And I appreciate the honesty of my colleagues today with me, and that 75% are saying we really don't practice self-compassion in a regular way, and really 25% do. And so again, I appreciate your honesty in that. And again, I would be consistent with you. I think, and so I think maybe most of all from this topic as we leave today later is just to really take this topic and let it resonate with you, and really take some time over a cup of coffee, or just to really think about, you know, what are some small changes that we can make. And maybe it's as simple as the next time we receive or experience a failure or a setback or something in that regard, that we really reframe how we hear it, and just being intentional to do that. So just thinking of those small pieces, and we'll be on this journey together. So may we have our next question? So what tools are you using to practice self-compassion? We've seen some of these come in already. And first of all, I don't know if any of you have used any of the exercises I just mentioned regarding journaling or reframing self-talk. So let's just take a minute and see if you can chat in any of the exercises that you might do, or if you have other things that you are doing. We saw some come in as far as practicing art and reading and walking. Love to hear what others of you are doing. I'm seeing some great comments here. Journaling and loving kindness meditations are my go-tos when I practice. And so I appreciate that again, it's an element of practice. And I think that the more opportunity we take to talk about this, again, helps us all understand that we're all learning together how to care for each other. Walking, exercise, enjoying nature. I heard a really interesting I had the opportunity to speak with some oncology nurses this week, and they were really talking about just the environment of the fluorescent lighting and being in that clinical sterile environment. And it just reminded me, to your point here, that just stepping out of that and enjoying nature and taking that quick walk really helps us draw that boundary between some of our work and our personal spaces. Oh, I love this. I asked myself, what would, in this case, Beth say? And so again, what a wonderful way to just immediately, you're practicing that great exercise we were just talking about. What would a friend say? And I love that you have a trusted friend to actually call by name. I think I'll adopt that one. That's a great idea. I'm seeing meditation, walking my dog, using a personal trainer to stay accountable for my own health needs. Another great point. We don't have to do this alone. There's a lot of great self-care ideas and coaches. And again, whether it's a friend or a specific colleague with that expertise challenging you, that is great to have that accountability. It's easy to get lost on our own, especially in our busy work days, if we're not having accountability on some nature. And I love, Jeff, what you're saying in regard to, it can be challenging to difficult to maybe meditate or have a practice, but when it doesn't go okay or doesn't go as long as you thought, you are still knowing that you got something out of it. Now, I think especially for busy clinicians, we're finding we're interrupted a lot. We can also just be interrupted a lot personally. And so it's hard to carve out longer lengths of time. So I really like your perspective of, even if you are doing something just briefly, again, that's going to energize you and change your focus, and it's going to be healing for you. So y'all are making some really great points today. Thank you for your engagement in your discussion. And again, the idea of vulnerability is coming out. And I think as I was preparing for this, I was also struck by that. In order for us to, I think, experience Dr. Neff's that human nature piece of this understanding of self-compassion, it's really important that we are then vulnerable and transparent with each other, not only for our own healing, but then we can understand that we're not alone, in what we are facing. And so again, that is a really excellent point that you're bringing up. Thank you for sharing that. And really finding those people who are trusted and identifying those colleagues or friends in your life that you can share with is so important. How about the next question here? What tend to be your barriers in implementing these practices? Love to hear some discussion from you in that regard. I think one of the barriers that was coming out just earlier in our discussion through some of the comments already is just, again, we're so busy caring for others that, again, not taking that focus or that time to really care for ourselves. Time, that one just shouted out. If someone else needs something, I'll often put their needs first, not leaving time for my own needs. And I know you're not alone in that comment. I think many of us would share that. Letting go of excuses. Wow, that's very insightful. And many times we do have a lot of excuses in our toolbox. And so again, taking time to just be honest, I think, about those, and again, reframing those and looking at those healthy habits that we can move forward with. And so again, we're not alone in that. Several of us are saying, hey, we can understand that. We also make excuses pretty quickly here. Just that knee-jerk reaction to be self-critical instead of self-compassion. And again, I do hope you take that away today. I think that, again, you're not alone in that reaction. I think many of us, and would tend to be many times when we receive information that we're more judgmental than we would be if we were speaking to someone else or showing that compassion to others. So again, that is one that I think we can all walk away with and be more intentional in that moment to think about. So excellent feedback. Thank you again for your discussion. I think we're learning a lot from each other. And again, we're building our own awareness and self-compassion that, again, we're not alone, and that this is all something that we know is important, and we need to step back and take time to build this into our own lives. And then I don't know if anyone can share a recent success. Is there anything that you have done? And this has been coming through and just seeing some of the great things that you are doing and providing self-care for yourself. But if you have a recent success you want to share, we'd love to hear that. I think one that I was experiencing this past year, I think this past year has been certainly a challenge on many levels, and that we've all had an opportunity to learn in self-growth. It's provided that platform for us to jump off of. And I think that just in regard to, it's been a challenge just learning to potentially, maybe you have a different role for your work. I know for myself, learning to work from home with Zoom, with children, with dogs, with UPS knocking at the door. And I think there was a time where I would have seen all of those things and how I react maybe as not being perfect, not showing my best self. But I'm learning to see that other people's dogs are running in as they're meeting. UPS is, at the door, and so I think that just even with that, all that's come from the challenges of this year, we've learned to be more patient with each other. And I know I've learned to be more patient with myself, and to understand that we're all, kind of in this together and learning together. Here's one. I put my bicycle in my home office as a reminder that I can take a stationary spin when I take a break. That's a great idea. And thank you for sharing that. That's a really practical one that we can walk away from. So that's a great success. The meditative practice of learning a new skill that required much patience. Congratulations. Absolutely, it takes practice and it takes discipline to care for ourselves. And so thank you. Glad for you to chat in. Any other wins? Well, I know we're almost at the end of our time together. Oh, this is another great one. Learn to walk away from the computer. That's such a timely one. And again, just reminds us of the importance. I know I've been learning from others recently, just some of the boundaries that they have from whether it's our computer for whether work, or even just maybe needing to take a break from that computer, but just those boundaries from our work day to our personal day, and especially with our new routines, that's become a blur for many people. Started turning my work laptop off on weekends. Another excellent point. And so again, and back to the earlier comment on nature, I think is also just, again, there are just some ways that you can maybe take a walk or just take a break from that professional, from that work world. There's a lot of people doing things that are you may be experiencing as well, as to really separate yourself from that work time and personal time. So great example of turning the laptop off, especially if it's in relation maybe to your work responsibilities, or even stepping away from the computer timely throughout the day, so that you exercise, get a drink, take care of yourself, and just refocus your mind to come back fresher to interact with those around you. Y'all have some excellent points. Thank you again for sharing those. And I hope that as we end today, like I said, I'm on this journey with you. I really felt like I don't know that we've talked about this element of self-compassion enough. And so I really appreciate that this was one of our topics in our toolbox today. I hope that you will take just again, just the insight of really taken some time to think about this in your own life, that you will then maybe try something new, some of the new opportunities or strategies that we talked about, and that you'll just have a chance to talk with your other colleagues about how they're doing, and really open the door for this conversation so that we can all be caring for ourselves in that important way. And I'll just open it now for questions and answers. And again, really appreciate your engagement and comments throughout the discussion. It's always so important to learn from each other. Thank you.
There's a question that came to me, and the question was about how can we model self-compassion on a virtual team? It seems kind of hard to show, to emote, so to speak, compassion to ourselves, but even more across Zoom. Can you give us any tips for that?
Yeah, that is a very timely and insightful question. You know, and maybe goes back to some of the experience I was sharing. It's interesting when I've seen us on Zoom, many of us are talking about Zoom fatigue. We run from meeting to meeting to meeting. Susan, I'm not sure if that's your day as well. And I think that, we've kind of started maybe just, I think if we can sometimes just call out that, I just finished up, I need to take a quick drink, or we were even talking about not having, we're not taking lunch potentially. It's almost like when I was in the bedside days and I couldn't even get my lunch break in. I mean, we're having days like that on Zoom as well. And so maybe giving ourselves permission to turn off our camera in a meeting so that we can grab a smoothie, eat a drink, eat a snack. And so I've been trying to remember to ask permission in a sense, or just to set that. I think to the ideas also in this chat around being vulnerable. It is kind of a new practice on Zoom that we're just going to have to go ahead and state what we need because we're, just not there physically, maybe to show some nonverbal or some other ideas there. So that's a great one, and I'm going to have to continue to explore that a little bit more. Susan, I don't know if you have additional ideas on that topic, but.
Well, I'm struck by the question, but more so I'm thinking about in my own mind how I could start meetings or participate in meetings where both self-compassion and other compassion was part of the value of our meetings. And so I'm not sure I have much to add, but I'm sure rumbling around in my head about how we could manifest and bring that to the space, especially since everyone who's joined today, comes from an oncology practice of some sort. And so we already are working in pretty loaded environments. And so meetings can either enhance or detract from that experience. So it was a good question for sure.
Very good question. I think it's one that we all need to take and think a little bit longer on. Agree.
So here is a comment with a question. I'm fairly new to my role, and I think a challenge is the fine line of showing I'm a team player and a hard worker with setting up my own healthy work-life boundaries, right? Any suggestions for new team members or new in a role of how you show I want to participate fully, but I also need to do self-care?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to maybe creating that culture within your team. And to do that, you have to talk about it. It's not always easy conversations. I know recently we have been talking about, if one of us is on PTO or one of us is taking, that time, that we really be mindful of respecting that time away. Because again, it's very easy in our culture now to just grab a phone, grab a text, jump on a Zoom. And so really kind of holding each other accountable that we have, need to step away, so that we can be energized and refreshed when we come back to the work environment. Otherwise, it's just very, very blurry. So I think, but I think to do that, it has to be called out as a discussion point, in your team meeting. It's almost like setting the culture for your team. What can you all agree on, that is important to that foundational framework of how you want to move forward together. And that could be not only those kind of boundaries around PTO, but even into your day, what's kind of your cutoff, what seems reasonable for you in your day that you're kind of cutting off and moving to your personal time, in the evening where you can. And again, many of our responsibilities blur over, but just having that ability to know that you have this time that's set aside more for your family, your personal time versus, being blurred with those work interruptions.
Yeah, I love that question. And it goes
Mhm.
back to the other question, which is perhaps we grounded ourselves on a team and outlined what does it mean to practice self-care? What does it mean to be a team player? What it does
Mhm.
it mean to have boundaries? Do we give each other permission to
Mhm.
not answer emails during off hour? And can we make
Mhm.
agreements to that?
Mhm.
I think it's
Excellent.
an important distinction. So it's great.
Mhm. And maybe sharing like we did today, some of the wins, if you are doing so. I know I really enjoy hearing when someone's learned a new skill or they've read a new book or something, that's encouraging. It also reminds me to take that time out for myself to do that as well.
Well, I don't see any other questions come in, but I definitely want to just thank you, Emily, today. This session was spectacular, and I learned a great deal about self-compassion and the ways that I could be more energized if I dedicated myself to that practice. I also want to acknowledge all of the attendees today. We know your work is a gift. What you provide every day is masterful and during pretty tough times. And so we just want to thank you for joining us today. We definitely want to acknowledge our sponsors for today's presentation, which is Merck and Takeda. Thanks to them for being so generous. And mark your calendar. In the next couple weeks, our next session will be May 15th. And Krista Nelson will be talking about moving towards your values. How can you create a GPS for your soul so that everything that you choose to do and say is aligned with moving towards, not away from your values. So for those of you who have been trained in any acceptance, commitment, therapy techniques, this will be right up your alley. You'll see some of the language in that. So we hope to see you there. And then finally, if you have any questions about how you can get access to this recording, or you just have other future comments or inquiries, my colleague Kara and I are always at the ready, except for after hours or on weekends, because we're going to be practicing self-care. And I do want to acknowledge Kara today, who put these programs together. Thank you for your dedication to those of us who are oncology providers and professionals. So we give you back about 3 minutes of today's hour. We ended a little early. Better to end early than to go over. We hope that you will go on your walks. You will do your art and read your books of fiction. That you'll talk to yourself like you would talk to a good friend. Have a great Saturday and a wonderful weekend. Thank you again, Emily.
Thank you.